Alright. There we go. And we're live. So I'm going to go ahead and post this. I'm going to go ahead and post this in new videos and in regular. I got, yeah, just a second. Hey everybody, just give me a few seconds to get everything sorted. And once I get all the links popped in Discord, we're ready to go. There we go. And there we go. All right. So I decided to live stream this because things happened today that were decidedly not good. I was not going to have time to actually sit down and record based off things. Basically, this morning I was almost involved in a head-on collision. And basically somebody came into my lane when I was driving to work this morning, and I went off the road at 55 miles an hour, and I don't even think the other person noticed I was there. I think they either just didn't know I was there or whatever what have you. So I wasn't really in the mood to sit down and do a recording as it was. I'm still kind of riding high on the anxiety, even though I went to sleep for a little bit, stuff like that. I've been trying to tamp down on, what happened. But I'm really glad I was awake this morning, because if normally I'm driving to work and I'm half asleep, if I had been half asleep this morning, I wouldn't be sitting here right now, because I'd probably be in the hospital. But in any case, I went off the road at 55 miles an hour. My vehicle's fine. I'm fine. I'm just a little bit shook up. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about that for a little bit. Yeah, so, guys, be careful on the road. Just be paying attention, because that scared the crap out of me. And it's been a very long time since I've had any real anxiety problems that I've had in the past. I've been having them today. Can everybody hear me? I'm not sure. Just in case people can, I'm waiting for somebody in the chat to say something. I'm being joined today by Arco, who's in the Discord. Will be watching this.
Hello.
And he's already seen all this. Yes, clearly the Emperor protects Prophet, but he's already seen all this, so he agreed to watch it with me. So we're going to be sitting here having a little bit of Trident reacts instead of the old man reacts. Yeah, at least I didn't find out I was perpetual the hard way, Ronnie. I mean, that I can tell you, it was one of those moments where, everything kind of slowed down, and then all of a sudden I'm looking at this car that's in my lane, and I had probably 20 feet of separation between me and him, and my brain was just like, fucktard! And I just yanked the wheel as hard as I could to the right, came off two wheels, almost flipped. I was damn sure I blew my axle, but it didn't happen. And I didn't lose control of the vehicle, and I don't know how I managed to keep control of it, because it wasn't like a highway where you go off the road and, it's smooth and stuff like that. This was a backcountry road that I was taking in between two towns to get to an office that I work at. And, it was not fun. It was not good. But at least I did not find out on Perpetual, Ronnie, because that would have been a shocking incident. Shut up, Prophet. You fucking turd. Alright, so last episode we found out who the Prophet was. My faith in the fact that Anakin Skywalker is a moron was confirmed. And here we are. We're going to watch episode 24. Prophet, I am glad that you could make this, even though you're a heretic and you should burn. In any case, here we go. I gotta hit the right buttons.
Hitting the right buttons is important.
Yes. I love his intros. I know how he makes them now. Jessica Jacobs, nice. No, you weren't, Iskander. William, I hope you enjoy it with me, bud. Yes, Jack, I agree with you.
Inquisitor Tarweiler stepped out from the shadows of the now vacant outpost and into the steel shimmer of the Axumite street. He took a moment to pause and breathe in,
Let's go.
long and deep. The rain, thick and chilling the air about him to almost freezing. It fell over his pale skin and black eyes in soaking sheets, so clean, so cold. The dead weeping of an entire world. Now, all Weiler needed to do was sabotage the central spaceport, and his box would be closed and ready to be lit aflame, with all the sacrificial fools still locked inside. His man, Major Flecken, was yet waiting at the Basilica of Salvation, ready to do his duty at a moment's notice, awaiting only Tar's command to act. Tar had done everything to ensure the man's success, and the man in question was a capable and loyal agent. He would have no trouble reaching the inner sanctum of even the most guarded place, the Inquisitor having disabled the vast majority of the security and detection systems between the Major and his goal ahead of time. And even were he to be confronted, the prized equipment he had been given before the battle would suffice to defeat any sister and cause enough chaos in the process for his duty to be done. And, as a bonus, the Major would assume that taking possession of something like a void grenade would double as an assurance of his own ultimate survival. The poor fool. The Inquisitor grinned his shark's grin, rain clattering on the white teeth. The Major was no doubt considering how best to preserve the use of the valuable weapon, either to keep for the future or to return back for the Inquisitor's favor. What the man could not know was that, as far as Tar was concerned, that grenade had already been thrown. It was a shame to lose such a man as Major Flecken, but ultimately, pieces were meant to be exchanged, not hoarded. And the exchange was worth many times the value of the piece. This one world would set the stage for the entirety of the war to come. For here, all the most troublesome forces within his own command would die. Here, too, would he plant the seed that he would soon water and grow into the weed which would, finally, strangle the Skywatch and remove their troublesome interventionism from the board once and for all. Feeling a triumphant eagerness surging within him, it was all the tall Inquisitor could do to stifle the burning urge to hurry his two companions along as he turned back to watch.
Yeah, this is Shark Teeth
The
guy.
technically excommunicated Magos and Tar's own pet Daemon host made their way out the door he had just exited through and into the downpour. The Magos was a tall, thick, writhing mass of arms and mechadendrites. Though he hit it well with the fashion of his deep red robes, he had a centaur-like lower body, the though he rarely deployed his back legs when it was not required of him. When deployed, the metal-faced, single-eyed priest of the machine god could achieve terrifying speed. Right now, however, the ancient and mostly concealed heretic Magos was taking his time, as was the monster who followed after him.
We are nearly done,
Tarweiler yelled through the rain.
Magos, summon the gun cutter. Our next destination is the central spaceport,
He said. Omni Kraden Gamma nodded stiffly in response, the hem of his red, emerald-lined robe wagging in the downpour, mechanical eye flashing as he did as he was bid to.
Arco, this is why I have problems with people with like sharp teeth. Like this is why. This is the kind of shit that I'm talking about.
You act like a guy with that kind of dentition fucked your girlfriend. I mean,
The daemon host, a foul and enslaved being known as Jackalanica Centhurak Tress,
Okay, really?
was still contenting its attention by licking his bloody lips and fingers, making the Inquisitor wrinkle his nose at the beast. This, in turn, prompted the once man, now monster, to look up and sneer, licking the gore more slowly from its talons and slicing its own tongue in the process.
No.
Though the sight nearly drew a cringe from Tar, he affected nothing but disgust, and the host revealed nothing but sadistic pleasure in the casual attempt to
Profit.
disturb him.
Your every defiance is just another turn of my blade, Jackal. Do not forget, you have already earned one penance for yourself, which will be enacted when we return to the prison.
The Inquisitor warned his demonic slave. It began to growl in response, the sound like distant animal screams. But the black eyes of the Inquisitor did not so much as flinch, promising ever-mounting punishment before the vile unthing collapsed to its knees and cowered in open submission. Tar flashed a shark-toothed smirk and turned away from it, his mind consumed with thoughts of the future and all its treasures.
That
The
guy's
gun
name
cutter
gave me
arrived
and Ronnie
soon
a headache.
after, slicing through the falling rain and smothered light with the loud roaring of burning thrusters. The jagged craft screeched overhead and began to circle, looking for a clear place to set down. The Inquisitor found a deep frown setting onto his maligned features, regarding the meandering form of his ship with a growing suspicion. He and his entourage were standing beside a clear stretch of road, easily large enough to accommodate the gun cutter's length and width. So why not hurry up and land here?
Magos, connect my Vox to the captain. The longer he spins in the air, the more chance there is that he, and thus we, will be noticed.
Tar said, turning once more to regard the tech priest. There was a pause then, and after a time, Omni Kraden answered in a way which chilled the blood of even Inquisitor Tarweiler. Response:
Negative.
Communications
Fell.
18.7 seconds ago. Captain Sol Van Rierenlo is currently
Unreachable.
droned the forbidden Magos.
So we have no access to our own Voxnet at this range?
Asked the Inquisitor. Response:
Affirmative.
We do not.
The Inquisitor paused briefly then, breathing in once more, but this time
This guy sounds like he has more problems with his Vox Halo than Phasian does.
I believe this might be a riff on TTS's version of Belisarius Call. The meme machine himself.
Yeah, and Ronnie, you're absolutely correct, buddy. Especially Prophet.
sniffing the moist air like a weary hound. His mind put together the clues he had access to even as his nose began to pick up the faint whiffs of ozone, burning, and blood. A spike of adrenaline heated him, and he snapped back around to fully face Omni Kraden.
Get back inside the outpost, both of you.
He ordered, black eyes darting.
Make haste. We are about to be...
He began to say, suddenly silenced by the searing howls of blaster fire. The Inquisitor whipped around at the sound, drawing his thin-bladed sword from its sheath in one fluid motion as he invested it with the power of his mind.
He's gonna eat
making
somebody.
the blade a focus point for his tremendous psychic might.
He's
He
100%
slashed
gonna
the
eat
air,
somebody.
the wave of power which followed the wake of his sword emanating out and colliding with a sudden torrent of blue and green bolts, scattering the blaster fire in a spray of energy and smoking rain. Following the unexpected hail of near death and audible even through the consistent drone of the rain and distant thrum of thunder, was the blood-curdling roar of thousands of enraged clone troopers. Tarweiler craned his head and watched as a white and yellow horde of false men came pouring over the lip of a nearby suspended avenue, which hung above and slightly to the north of their current location. The clones were coming down almost right on top of them, and the mad replicate had not stopped blasting. The Inquisitor became a blur of motion, sword and power whipping out and driving away the deadly lines of plasmic weapons fire.
Go!
He ordered, voice frantic as he did his work. In response, the Daemon host wrapped its arms around Omnicraten Gamma's midsection, pulling itself and the Magos into the dark confines of the outpost, the door slamming shut after them. Relieved of his burdensome charges, the Inquisitor leapt to the right and began to dodge and duck the shots that came for him. The replicate forces were descending rapidly, desperately even, and already those carried aloft by jetpacks were directly contending with him, swooping low and close as they discharged their weapons.
Yay.
Tarweiler reached out with one hand, a gesture he used to channel his psychic powers, snatching one of the flying clones
not
out of
incorrect.
the air with invisible fingers. The false man hung, jets burning as he flailed and kicked in the air, though he could struggle only briefly.
Effing chat for this
Weiler
guy.
waved his hand, swinging the replicate warrior across the air, catching 4 other flying troopers in a veering line, as he used the initial warrior as a lethal projectile. But the clone's brothers gave answer right away, homing in on the man and beginning to swarm. Tarweiler bounced torrents of blaster bolts back all the while, aiming to strike the Republic army which was ambushing him, but finding himself becoming outpaced and overwhelmed by the sheer sudden numbers which came for him. Additionally, the replicate seemed possessed by a fervor and frenzy that the Inquisitor had not expected to find amongst the limp wills born from pale, cloned flesh. Furthermore, he had planned everything about this.
These are the Chaos guys from the last episode where they tried to ambush. They got exposed to the warp. I bet you anything that's what these guys are.
Plan, and had replanned each time he had received the opportunity to view the current situation in any broad sense. And from that planning, Tarweiler knew that these clones in particular should not be here. They should have been stationed at the park to protect the Republic's artillery support. That army somehow arriving here made absolutely no sense whatsoever. They would not abandon their positions, and the Imperial forces sent to stop them would not be enough. He knew this. And yet, here they were, fouling his designs. He ripped a dozen clones from their lines, tossing them into the yawning void between the elevated platforms and streets, before cooking 3 more jet troopers mid-flight with a redirected scattering of blue plasma. Weiler activated another one of his precious digital weapons, issuing forth a lance of strafing black light from a bejeweled ring he wore on his free hand. But as he watched the energy rip mercilessly into the charging clones, he realized that he could not hope to kill them all, and his attempts at forcing them to rout, or at least cease their advance, had been revealed to be blatantly fruitless endeavors. These replicae had been driven raving mad, a point emphasized a moment later when 4 of the jetpack-mounted troopers drove straight down into the Inquisitor, each carrying a stolen Imperial weapon in their hands. They flew in for him like competing buzzards, their knives, swords, and axes falling upon Tarweiler from all directions. The hubris of it scalded Tarweiler nearly as much as its
Ronnie,
effectiveness.
Slanesh
As he found
still
his sweat
enjoyed
mingling
it.
in thick rivulets with the
Slanesh
rain
still enjoyed it,
before
Ronnie.
he scattered it, driving up his own abilities as he accessed more and more of his hidden warp strength. He bent his body, as well as the fabric of reality, as he slipped and slid around the 4 strikes. His black blade licking out across arms and shoulders like a serpent's flickering tongue. Their weapon-bearing limbs came away in arcs of red and white. And as the replique reeled back, Tarweiler pursued, taking the heads off 3 shoulders, shocked to find his 4th strike evaded. The clone there ducked his sword and, with his remaining left arm, caught the falling axe he had been holding with his now severed right arm and slashed. The following parry sent the Inquisitor stumbling, his sudden lack of balance haunting him instantly as he felt pain and heat blossom across his back, shoulder, and left knee. He was sent to the ground, barely maintaining his grip on his weapon, whipping the blade about wildly as he fended off the continuing raining assault. He tried to rise, but was too busy preserving himself from death by blaster to stop the one-armed clone from running him down, kicking him hard in the chest with an amount of strength he simply could not have had. Tarweiler slid back, his transit
possessed.
across the wet steel street fueled by the force of the replique's blow, coming to rest only once his back collided with the wall of the outpost. He felt heat spill over his lips as he coughed blood onto his pearly white shark's teeth, and squinted through the rain and the sudden pain of several broken ribs to look up at the clone who was menacing him. The Inquisitor found a brief reprieve from the blaster fire of the others and the one-armed clone.
Just going to answer a real quick question in chat. Antikira, Chaos Gods would not technically be reborn. They just are. They're not gods in the traditional sense. They're more... The Chaos Gods are more of... domains of emotion. So Slanesh would still cover the excess, joy, happiness, sorrow, all those other kinds of things. Nurgle would still be death, decay. Basically, he's the god of nature. Khorne would still be honor, bloodlust, murder, war, and Slanesh would still be in rehab.
Clone stood over him, shielding him in his shadow. Tarweiler growled through stained fangs
And Zinc would still be a turd.
made to lift his sword, but the clone stomped on his hand, pinning it down and breaking some of his fingers, kneeing the Inquisitor in the face. The Imperial gasped under the force of the blow, feeling a tooth chip before he was backhanded, hard with the remaining clenched fist of the replique, which still held tight the power axe it had eluded. Tar spat more blood and coughed, crying out in defiance as the axe swung up and came down, burying itself deeply into the wall beside the Inquisitor's head. He felt the pressure lift from his broken hand, and his sword being kicked away as thick armored fingers wrapped around his throat and lifted. The replique was shorter than Tarweiler, yet left him dangling as he lifted the Inquisitor up into the rain. The clone wore no helmet, and from his eyes seemed to pour a steady stream of red blood. But it was not this, nor even the continuing flow of crimson essence which exited from the replique's missing right arm, which most concerned the Inquisitor. It was the burning, flaring orange and red malice which he saw glowing like embers in the false man's eyes.
Chaos!
Tarweiler managed to choke past grit bleeding teeth. Acting with the typical arrogance of the great enemy, the clone confirmed his suspicions, the red blood pouring out from his shoulder, congealing and thickening, becoming red bones, then sinew, and then reddened skin, all before their eyes. The clone seemed almost as shocked as Weiler was, opening and closing his new muscular limb before taking it and wrapping his freshly forged fingers around Weiler's throat, drawing him in closer towards the replicate's bleeding face. He did not speak, and yet one word resounded so loudly within the mind of the transformed clone that Tarweiler could not help but hear it echoed within his own. A call, a summoning, a name. A fell name. A daemon's name. But not a daemon that the Inquisitor knew anything about. The name was powerful, primordial, yet alien and unknowable. It was a name which held within it thousands of years of intense conflict, malice, and boundless, thirsting ambition. The name pressed into him mentally as the fingers around his throat dug deeper and deeper into his pale skin. Tar groaned, resisting both with his psychic might, yet finding that to halt the progress of one, he needed to permit the advance of the other. His mind alone was not a great enough force to overcome the hands of this cursed clone and the weight of its new malign god at once. He felt his strength failing and tried to call out, only for his voice to catch in his throat, unable to force itself up and out of his paling lips. The replicate grinned its own red monster's grin before it was suddenly struck hard across the face, its head snapping back violently as a bolt round took it in the temple, before a line of more micro-missiles ran down its body, each exploding loudly. The clone was sent sprawling, as was Tarweiler, though to the Inquisitor's credit, he rolled himself into a low crouch.
Did he say it and I just
force
somehow missed
freezing
it?
and deflecting the rain which fell on and around him. The replicate around him raised rifles and began to fire, but not at him. The gun cutter swung in the air, engines scorching the rain into thick mist and steam, its turrets laying fire into the mass of clones. Bolters and heavy bolters on full blast. Even this carnage did not dissuade the Republic warriors, who only roared back at the flying craft as they leveled rifles and returned fire. The Inquisitor did not allow shock to stun him for long, calling his sword back into his grip, holding it now in his left hand to spare the broken digits on his right, before getting up and running to skid and shelter behind a sloped embankment beside the outpost. He felt a cold, defeatist shiver run through his body as he flipped himself around and looked up, body flat against the side of the slope as he watched the cutter, hull blazing and guns firing erratically, spin out of the air above him and crash somewhere across the avenue from him, its collision rocking the suspended street. He tightened his grip on the blade in his hand, waiting and watching grimly as the rounded, white silhouettes of the replicate began to crest the lip of the embankment, long rifles aimed down towards him. Their white and yellow helmets shone in the dim light that penetrated the curtain of rain, glowing more brightly as shining, arcing balls of light came into view over their shoulders. The replicate seemed to pause to observe these, and the Inquisitor grit bloody, broken teeth and took advantage of the second he was given, punching up with his broken hand and angling to fire another digital weapon. Yet before he or the clones above him could open fire, another hail of weaponized death crashed into the false...
Did he say the name of the... Did he say the word and I just didn't hear it for some reason?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, okay, well... I'm feeling kind of, no.
Men standing at the lip of the slope, scorching and burning them, forcing the clones back.
Yeah, Dark Innovator's
the
absolutely
volley
correct
of
with what he
blast fire
said.
had the Inquisitor spinning around, his wide black eyes reflecting the sight of speeding chimeras and running guardsmen, who hit the base of the embankment at a run, charging or rolling up with the roar of engines and the war cries of humanity. The Inquisitor was stupefied. He had no idea who these people were even supposed to be.
Are they going to shoot the shark men?
How could he have misplaced the position of yet another armed force of this size? The whole affair had him questioning how in control he really was. the sentiment only deepening as
Yes,
he heard
Doc.
the precise words of their war cry. For the Emperor! For the Imperium! For Saint Gaxian! They screamed
Gax?
into the rain as they poured in from around him, almost trampling Tar in their haste to meet the enemy in battle. One of them did stop, looming over the Inquisitor, the tall silhouette denoting the man as a Commissar. The red-garbed man reached down, taking the Inquisitor roughly by the forearm and hauling him up to his feet. Inquisitor Tarweiler, I presume, the man said. The Inquisitor nodded his head, standing up straighter and spitting to the side before responding in earnest.
Indeed, you have my gratitude, Commissar.
Terandor, the man said.
Terandor?
Morning,
As
Ethan.
in Command Squad, Terandor? Weren't you and your whole column...
The Inquisitor began to say. Annihilated? Very nearly, Inquisitor. Very nearly. But no. As you can see, we still live. And we are still fighting. We'll try to secure the crew of that cutter we saw go down, but no promises. The Commissar said, striding forward and past the Inquisitor, power sword drawn, bolt pistol held tight in his other hand.
Wait, Commissar! Make sure to keep your men out of that outpost. That's an order.
Tarweiler said to his back. Terandor paused then, but did not turn back
J24 I
around.
am.
Acknowledged, Inquisitor.
I am J24.
Will you be requiring anything else? He asked.
Yes.
Weiler said, raising his voice to be heard as another chimera creaked and wheeled up and past them to engage the enemy.
Who or what is Saint Gaxian?
Look at yourself. Worrying about music licensing. What you need.
Okay, so Gaxian is someone I'm not
I
familiar
don't care for your product about copyright.
with. Yes. So okay, so one of two. Could it be a Star Wars deity? I think, Dark, you might be correct, but there's still just manifestations of the other technically they are parasites. Let's see, you think it's Nihilus? Maybe. Let's see. Gaxian was the psyker who stopped the buildings falling, right?
Yep.
Okay, now I'm not an idiot. Yay! Clone Force 99 and trashy.
How much farther, Tech? The leader of Clone Force 99 asked. The wary clone commando subtly scanned their surroundings again as the four continued to follow the thumping, clunking wake of their hijacked servitor.
I'm really not thinking that they
Tech
would be
stood just
significantly
behind
weaker.
it, holding a data pad which was linked into the back of the machine man's skull, viewing the contents of its mind, such as it was. He'd found that, by doing this, and fiddling with its thoughts for a bit, the brainy clone was now able to control the droid man almost as efficaciously as General Skywalker had.
Just to answer a question in chat, Sleep, considering the way that the Imperium literally guards itself non-stop against chaos, through the Inquisition and through general ignorance, the Star Wars universe does not have those safeguards in place. They did not have the Eldar constantly fighting chaos after they fucked up. They didn't have everything else that transpired up to that point. So chaos would be, as much as the Imperium is an invader, chaos would be almost an invasive species of mental parasites that would just come in. And that's the reason I've always said you have to dismiss chaos from the equation when you're dealing with Star Wars versus 40K, because what winds up happening is the second that the Chaos Gods become known to the Star Wars universe, it's like an invasive species taking over local wildlife. There is no stopping it. They have no checks or balances in place. They have none of that. And yes, the dark side of the Force would be getting a huge boost. Go ahead and hit play again. Arca, what do you think? Do you have anything to put in on that?
Not really, no.
Oh, Dark Innovator says, "Thank you, Prophet. Thank you very much. World Eaters are coming. GW announced World Eaters are coming? When did that happen?" Oh, wow. Let's see. All right. Let's see. All right. Okay, here we go. Dark Innovator says, "Speaking of chaos, my lord, there's a pro-chaos narrative vid out these days. I intend to put it in a rage reactions, then I realize that's silly Bloodborne lore." Post it, Dark. Post it. Go ahead and post it. I am changing the way the Request for Reacts channel works. I have been saying that I'm going to be doing that for a bit now. I just have to get around to actually, sitting down one day and rehashing out things. So go ahead and post it. Completely fine. All right, I'm going to start up again. And thank you, Prophet.
It also allowed him to view the route they were being taken down. The squad was inside a narrow hallway, wide enough for the three of them to walk abreast. They passed in twos with the servitor leading the way. They would occasionally pass a few servants or crew, but they went mostly unnoticed, and thus far
I
were
agree with his
unquestioned.
statement.
Gradually,
Good, Dark. You
they
go
were
ahead and do
finding
it.
themselves among more and more red and bronze effigies and icons, the symbol of a human skull split halfway between being bone and cybernetic being one of the most common. "Are you sure you should be doing that so openly?" Crosshair asked, just less than calmly. The common crew and inhabitants of the ship seem utterly unconcerned, and, indeed, frightened by machines and technology. They did not question R2-D2, and I doubt they will question this, Tech said, speaking as though he were helpfully informing the cantankerous sniper. "Doubt? Well, that sounds like strong judgment when it comes to risking our cover." The tall clone snapped back. "We needed a way to control the droid man now that the general went off on his own." "Deal with it, Crosshair. And Tech, what about that ETA I asked for?" Hunter said, interjecting before Wrecker thought of something unhelpful to add. The clones smiled and stood back as they rounded a corner. "I think we are just about here, Sergeant," Tech said. Before them, the corridor widened and ended with an enormous door.
Yes,
It
Ronnie,
was
you're right
massive,
about that.
metal, and engraved in glorious fashion with the half-metallic, half-organic skull symbol they had found before. But they were not alone. Two droid men, much like the one who guided them, were stood to either side of the doors. Aside from being larger, these two new examples of the machine men differed in that they seemed primed for combat. Both having an excess of red armored plating and both wielding sparking, club-like weapons at the end of each arm in place of hands.
Shock balls.
"What now?" asked Crosshair. "Simple. I'll simply allow our half-machine friend here to continue on his way and grant us access. Those two guards up there ought to allow him and us to pass unmolested." "They better not molest us," Wrecker said with a brutish laugh, clapping his fist against his palm.
Where's Strider when you need
"What
him?
makes you so sure they won't get in our way, Tech?" Hunter asked as they continued to approach. "Well, our guide is returning here naturally, so I imagine he's allowed. As for us, I've noticed that, just like our droid men, all others we've seen thus far are subservient to humans, or at least ignore them. Without someone here to signal us out, or some alarm to let them know something is amiss, they will probably just let us go through," Tech explained. Hunter watched the two sentinels they were approaching, noting how their heads seemed to smoothly and mechanically track their approach. "And you're certain about that?" Hunter asked. Tech shrugged in response. Probably. Hunter sighed at that answer and lifted his hand, signaling silently for Crosshair and Wrecker to hang back, which they did, both shouldering their weapons.
Nice, Ronnie.
Okay, Tech. Unplug from that thing for now, Hunter said softly. Tech looked at him with a perplexed expression. Whatever for? He asked. Because I don't think it's a good idea to be right next to him while he opens that door. So hang back with me. We'll catch up if it all looks up to standard, Hunter said.
Battlestar, I couldn't say.
Tech shrugged, but did as ordered, unplugging his datapad from the back of its neck and allowing the servitor to progress several feet in front of them before resuming his approach.
I want more
The
bucket.
guards tracked their guide, following the closest person to the door, but did nothing as the droid man trundled up to the access panel in the front of the entryway, using a jack on his sucking arm to interface with it. Hunter and Tech stood back, waiting, their brothers doing the same behind them. Some time passed, and then there was a chime, and the door hissed and slid open. Tech smiled. See? Nothing to worry about, he said as he started forward.
And this is when everything turns to shit.
He was halted as the two sentinel droid men to either side of the door unleashed horrible half-man, half-mechanical screams and leapt from their positions, both landing near their brainwashed guide. The trash-sucking droid man was beheaded by the first sparking strike of the assailing mace hands. But the two attackers did not stop after just that, ruthlessly beating the docile man-machine into sparking paste before jerking their faces, each one crammed with optic sensors, in the direction of Clone Force 99. Trashy, no! Wrecker cried from behind the first two clones. In the same moment, the large metal doors began to squeal and slowly close behind the pair of hostile servitors. Go now! Hunter yelled, drawing his vibroblade and dashing forward. Clone Force 99 moved not a heartbeat behind, Tech drawing his blaster pistols, and all four charging down the hallway towards the droidmen, even as the droidmen wheeled about, charging them back an instant later. Bird-like mechanical legs stomped in terrifying tandem as the servitors came for them, side by side. Mace arms held up and out to swing. Tech opened fire, but found his blaster bolts bouncing and glinting off the thick red armor the two droid men were encased in.
F's in chat for Trashy.
Crosshair, running while sighting down the targets on his scope, saw and noted that, also noting that they were not armored in their entirety. Their ears seeming to be a spot of lessened armored protection. Factoring that into his approach, he tossed out his thumb-sized deflector discs, sending out the small, magnetized plates like shuriken, adhering them to specific spots along the wall. He hardly waited after tossing before firing his shots, aiming at the discs he'd thrown, causing his blaster bolts to bounce off the walls on either side of them. The blaster bolts went wide before bouncing back in, striking both servitors on the outward-facing sides of their heads almost simultaneously. Armored enough to survive the shots, but not enough to avoid staggering and crashing into each other. Hunter and Tech made running leaps, clearing the man-machines in a single bound. Hunter taking the head off of the leftmost one in the process with his vibroblade, cutting through the thing's craned neck with one precise slice. Crosshair likewise leapt over the heap of man-machines, the single intact servitor managing to rise halfway to its feet, before Wrecker kicked it in the head. His Katarn-class battle armor cracking loudly against the ceramite plating of the servitor just before its head was sent careening into the ceiling. That was for Trashy! Wrecker spat. Wrecker, hurry up or you'll end up like Trashy, Crosshair called, getting the big man's attention just in
Trashy,
time.
let's go.
The large doors slid shut a second after Wrecker squeezed past, the four taking quick stock before looking around. The area around them was vast and seemed like some chaotic mishmash of a religious temple and a mechanic's bay or laboratory. The ceiling was high, and the space was crammed with arcane machinery, leaving all 4 clones gawking for a couple moments.
Whoa! I bet I could make a really loud echo in here,
said Wrecker.
What now?
What is wrong with
Asked
these
Crosshair.
guys?
Good question. Tech? Added Hunter. Tech seemed almost lost as he observed the area, data streaming across his goggles in thick, revealing trails. Tech? Hunter asked again. What? Oh, right, the brainy clone said, snapping back to the mission. Now we find an access terminal, and find out where they are controlling the bomb on an axis. Then we disable it, recover the general, and extract, he informed. Right. Stay close, and keep your eyes sharp. Just finding the general after this is going to be a chore. So let's not waste any time. Let's locate that access terminal, said Hunter, and without another word, Clone Force 99 proceeded into the bizarre machine temple.
Anakin and Iskandar. Oh look, it's an advertisement for the one game that drives me crazier than anything, that is the sap to my soul and destroys my will to live. League.
For a split second, I thought it was the diabetes guy.
Diabetes. Alright, so let's see. Heretic clones, what's right about them? They're mutated clones. Ethan has properly named Saint Trashy, who is the saint of the downtrodden servitors. Boop.
Void yourself, said Shala, her voice loud enough to be heard over the senseless bleating of the dampeners which sat nearby. The screeching voxes forced most words to be understood by lip reading, but not those words. Oh, come on, Shal, you lost fair and square, said the sneering, one-eyed man who sat across from her. Void yourself, she repeated, enunciating visibly and strongly with each word, making sure Gojin could read her lips. Shala's cold eyes regarding her fellow blank with nothing short of obvious contempt. Well, you did agree to strip if you lost the game, said Jogna, the broad woman smiling no less lecherously than one-eyed Gojin. Shala's face reddened the barest amount. She was reminded again, as she almost constantly was, of what the others in her unit preferred to and were encouraged to do whenever not on duty. Normally, just the sight of her would repulse other beings, and touching her was a cold experience, no matter how warm she actually was. But not here. Blanks could not feel their own blankness, and so it followed that they did not feel that of others either. And placing a bunch of touch-starved degenerates like them in one place was already an open invitation to the collapse of all moral and physical discipline.
We have literally been dropped into the middle of a game of blank strip poker. My day is complete.
Throw in the fact that their inquisitorial spawn.
What'd you say?
Oh boy.
Yes, and Prophet of the 8th Legion says it sounds Slaneshi, but, you know, it's a blank, so it's kind of like a guy with ED watching this. I don't know. Sleep Iskandar is a named character. He was, he's an original Thousand Son who was underneath Magnus. He joined the Black Legion a good amount of time back. He's been through a lot with Abaddon himself, and he was considered. Now every Black Crusade has had one figure or an event that was considered the herald of that. Abaddon himself was the herald of the first Black Crusade. Iskandar was the herald of the 13th, which is why I kept on saying I cannot believe that I didn't put this together. You know, I'll say yes, she wouldn't care if it was a blank. Yes, she would, because she can't see it. Wait a minute. Never mind, it's Slanesh, of course.
Iskandar Iskander Kaon also has an undead Dark Eldar waifu, because of course.
Because, of course, because if you're going to be an edgelord, you got to be all the way. Yeah.
Sponsor actively encouraged such practices, and the result was obvious.
What does the Imperium do with the male blanks? They have them have sex with the female blanks as much as possible because they need that pariah gene. If you've ever read the Commissar Kane books, Jurgen is a blank. But nobody really knows about it. In fact, it was Amberly Vale that found out when her psyker, the psyker in her retinue started losing its shit when it got near Jurgen.
Shala and Jogna were the only two females left in their unit who were not on maternity leave. While Shala did not shun intimacy herself, she had no interest in playing the role of an anti-psyker broodmare for Inquisitor Tarweiler.
Anti is pretty much
even
what
if she
they
did
do.
want to experiment with that kind of experience, Gojin was among the last of all human beings on her list of all possible people that she would ever share a bed with. Maverick, R9, and Jolus were not far behind on that list either. Mercifully, only Maverick was present from that mismanaged compilation of character flaws. As for Jogna, she was still here because she had no interest in men, but a very particular interest in Shala. She felt a shiver cleave its way down her spine as Jogna licked her lips.
If you don't know what a blank is, say so and Shadow will explain
I did not. Shala said in defense of herself, speaking coldly and logically. Gojin suggested it. You agreed and pushed me into this chair. Then Maverick tossed out hands to everyone, and you both told me we were playing 7 Stakes, when we were actually playing Fortress. Shala explained curtly. Maverick's bespectacled face bounced up from his cards, looking confused and dismayed all at once. Wait, we're not playing 7 Stakes? He asked no one in particular. Shala felt her hand slap her face, palm resting over one eye. No, you must have misheard it. Damn dampening voxes, lied Gojin, laughing, adding his own horrid noise to the constant sound. Shala closed her eyes and took a breath, letting the cacophony eat up everything else, turning the chaos into tranquility, at least for a few seconds. She knew the logical explanation for the Vox dampeners. They existed to prevent any of the prisoners above them from screaming or transmitting any sound that could reach them.
Okay, so, no one, basically what a blank is, it's a person that in every sense of the word doesn't have a soul. And the lack of a soul creates an intense amount of problems for them personally. Most mothers will kill a blank when it's born. The blanks that do survive are treated as outcasts, things like that. The general first instinct of someone... Oh, never mind, I'm an idiot. You're joking. Yay, I'm an idiot, keep it on going.
Her mind was warded from direct psychic information, but there were many things in the great void of creation that mankind was never meant to know. She actually appreciated the precaution when she had first been recruited. Now, she often found herself wondering what would actually drive her mad first. The discordant sounds firing from the Vox, or an actual eldritch secret. Unfortunately, she had also concluded that it was a moot point, since she would be driven to a bloody rampage by her companions far before either of those two options could rend her mind. She opened her eyes, returning to the irritating chatter she had been forced to be a part of, only to find herself staring at something she did not understand. Gojin was gasping, coughing. The smell of burning human began to filter into the room. Gojin sat directly across from her. His chair almost leaned against the wall, the emergency alert switch sitting beside his head. A large, red button adhered to the steel behind him by wires, cables, and metal paneling. There was something coming out of the wall now, piercing through the back of Gojin's chair and through his chest. A blue beam? It was like a humming bar of energy. Like a blade of melta discharge held suspended in time. But one thing was clear, and becoming clearer by the second. It was killing Gojin. The sound from the voxes was such that Maverick and Jogna, who had been staring at her, had not even noticed the emergence of the blade until it looped in a circle, slicing open the wall of the room and taking off Maverick's arm at the shoulder as it did. Gojin died, falling into 4 pieces as he was bisected and delimbed by the weapon's arc. His upper torso falling forward onto the table and cards, his lower parts remaining seated as his arms dropped away, single eye wide and blind as he collapsed. Jogna kicked back and away, her trained muscles cording in learned behaviors and moving before any of them. Maverick followed, falling out of his chair, screaming his lungs raw as he hit the ground and flailed mindlessly, cupping the burnt stump of his severed arm, legs kicking as his eyes rolled in pained frenzy. Shala, for her part, was frozen by the whole event. What was happening? They were under attack? Why had the attack come through the wall and not the ceiling? Her thought process was cut down as the blade withdrew from the molten circle it had carved, the slice then ejecting outward, blowing Gojin's scattered pieces away along with the table and chairs they had been sitting at. She would have been among those things that were tossed aside had Jogna not grabbed her roughly by the hem of her uniform and hauled her out of the path of danger. Shala flinching at the sensation of the wind whipping off the makeshift metal battering ram that had nearly crushed her. Maverick rose then, still screaming as he pounded his fist into the alarm button on the wall, slamming it again and again. But no alarm sounded. The box had been nearly bisected by the blade of blue light which came through the wall, and the damage had been sufficient to disable the button. Still, there was another button in the room. Shala felt herself thinking distantly. Another alarm switch by the door. But she had barely finished thinking that before they were under attack again. Maverick folded in half, sliced all the way through by a man holding a blue blade. A scar under blonde hair, eyes fierce and almost luminous. He whipped his arms around, his blade of heretical light scything through the surrounding dampeners and bringing them to silence. "Get the alarm! Get the alarm!" Jogna bellowed, tossing Shala backwards towards the door as she reached for the pistol and knife at her belt.
God.
She managed to get her blade free, raising in time to watch it be hacked in half by the strike of the intruder, who cut through the steel effortlessly, dividing Jogna's face in half with the same movement and killing her instantly. But Shala did not see that happen, scrambling on her hands and knees towards the door, breath rasping out of her in desperation. The Jedi behind her had time to react, to throw his saber to intercept, but hesitated at the notion of striking a crawling, helpless combatant from behind. That moment of morality was all Shala needed to activate the alarm, but while Anakin hesitated, Kaon did not.
Oh,
Emerging from the hole in the wall like a raven's shadow, the armless Marine sped from the breach at an unnatural pace, catching her head between his splayed toes and slamming it into the wall, dazing and pinning her there. Kaon balanced on one foot, his other raised, dexterous beyond what most would expect of a creature so large and so wounded to be capable of. She grunted in pain, teeth clenched together, hard breaths gusting spit and drool from her mouth as his foot crushed her against the wall. She opened bleary eyes, and there could see it, the button.
Forgive me, Shala.
Said the fallen Astartes, the literal demon who held her tight between the digits of his feet.
Had I arms, my balance would have allowed me to crush your skull instantly. There would have been no pain. But I'll do my best to make it quick.
He said. Her heart was painfully pounding in her chest, her blood ice and fire conjoined by sheer, unspeakable panic. But through it all, she could see it. The button. The alarm. She reached for it with her free hand, and Kaon twisted his foot. Crack! Shala's arm fell limp, far short of her goal, and the sense of her body left her. But she did not die. Still seeing from her eyes, neck broken, but still alive, a new utter horror began to fill her up. Kaon bent his knee, bringing his head closer to hers.
I am sorry,
he said, letting her collapse to the ground, something she could only feel from her head as she hit the floor like a sack of potatoes, dazed just enough by the impact to not see or understand Kaon's descending heel. As he crushed her head against the floor, gore churning and spattering.
That's bad.
Anakin groaned, wiping bloody gray matter from his robe. Was that really necessary? Anakin asked.
What did you think you were there
Kaon
to do?
nodded without orienting towards him.
yes.
He said with certainty. Not the stomp, Kaon. The wall. I could have just cut us out from the ceiling, and it would have taken us 3 minutes instead of 15. Anakin said, rolling his shoulders and flexing his legs.
Yep.
Perhaps. But the ceiling is reinforced with adamantium. Even if your weapon could cut through it, I doubt it would have managed it quickly enough to avoid raising the alarm. Given the choice between the two,
Kaon began to explain. Better to be crammed into the walls for 15 minutes than crammed into this room with the rest of the ship, Anakin concluded. The Chaos Space Marine nodded. Okay, fine. Then where to next? Where are they keeping this weapon of yours? Anakin asked, leaning against the wall and taking a deep breath. He could feel the force returning to him, but it was still smothered, only about 1/10 of the connection he felt normally. Kaon nodded his head and walked into the center of the room, seeming to pause and think.
this wall.
He said after a time had passed. What's behind that wall? Anakin asked.
Erebus. Blame Erebus.
More blanks,
said Kaon. Anakin sighed heavily. We don't have time for vengeance. Not right now. We need to get to this armory as quickly as possible, and preferably without killing our way to it, if we can avoid it. He said.
Where the fun in that?
Agree.
Said the sorcerer.
But to reach and use the weapons I need, we're going to have to create a free space. Even the bodies of these blanks are still suppressing our abilities. Killing them all will be the bare minimum of what we will require to escape. There is no other way.
He explained. Anakin shook his head. This will take too long, and besides, each time we breach and attack a room, there will be a chance that they raise the alarm. And then it's more or less over, he reasoned.
Again, I do not deny it, but that is a chance we will have to take. Unless you can think of another way of clearing the warp suppression from the area around us.
Kaon countered. Anakin paused at that, thinking, and only growing more frustrated as he came up with nothing better.
No dice.
All right, I see no other way. But if we are doing this, then you're going to need to help me, he said. Kaon raised his eyebrows over his stitched eye sockets.
I thought I already was.
He said mildly. No, not like that.
Jim
You
for
said
accounting,
you were,
yes.
like me.
Oh, God.
warp-sensitive person, right? Anakin asked. Kaon nodded almost without thinking.
Yes, but now...
He started to say, now you have these rods pushed into you that are keeping you from accessing it. Anakin concluded. Again, Kaon nodded. Then it's obvious what we have to do. We have to pull them out, said the Jedi, reaching for one such rod protruding from the man's shoulder. Blind Kaon did not realize what he was doing right away, not until he sensed the movement near his body.
Wait, General, do not touch them.
He barked out, but too late. Anakin's gloved hand wrapped around the black metal, gripping it tightly. But before he could pull on it, it pulled on him. The effect was almost instantaneous, making the Jedi sway in a sudden, dazed fugue. He had the distinct feeling of being a vessel filled with himself and now rapidly draining into the rod. What was this metal? What he had taken to be
That metal is infused with post-nut clarity.
some kind of element suddenly struck Anakin as undeniably technological. Yes, he could feel it. This metal, this black stone, was not mystical in nature, nor was it even an element of any single material. It seemed not to move at all as it drained out his soul. But the Chosen One could feel the buzzing, the churning, the maze of microscopic complexity within the rod, which seemed to physically drag his force potential within, biting like a swarm of 1 billion ants, all acting with an intelligent design, but lacking intelligence of their own. Kaon jerked away, but Anakin's hand was deadlocked around the bar, and he pulled them both along as he did.
General, let go. You will drain yourself beyond recovery. Release me, now!
Kaon roared, shaking his shoulders yet still unable to dislodge him.
Yeah, this is, I don't know what that is that he just has. Like, I have no idea what he's got his hands on. Does anybody in the chat know? Or is that something that's revealed later? Because if it is, just let it go. It's rods of stolen Necron rocks? From the pylons? Oh, God. Oh, okay. There we go. Alright.
Kaon! What is this? Anakin growled through grit teeth.
These rods are blackstone. They can empower or completely subdue any psychic presence they come in contact with. You need to let go, or you will be of no use to either of us.
The Marine growled back. But Anakin was barely listening by the end of his scolding. Sagging against the Chaos Space Marine, breath rapidly becoming shallow. The rod was devouring him. He needed to escape it, but it truly felt as though his soul were dragged out of him and forcibly flattened. He puffed a hard breath out through his nostrils before straightening and pulling as hard as he could. Kaon roared in pain, falling to his knees as the rod was hauled on, its cold length remaining firmly buried in his flesh.
Yay.
Anakin yanked once and then twice, but his hand refused to let go and the blackstone would not budge. Why was his hand malfunctioning like this? His other hand was opening and closing easily, and Kaon did not seem to be suffering from this kind of effect. So why, he thought to himself? Was it because his hand was mechanical? Was it reacting somehow with the technology of the rod? With that thought, Anakin changed his tactic. Calming for a moment and closing his eyes, shuddering from head to toe. These rods were machines. He was sure of it. He could feel it. And if they were machines, then he was certain he could tamper with it, reprogram it even.
You're an idiot.
If not just disassemble it. He reached out with his mind, going towards
Shadow
instead
Band,
of
you
away
didn't have
from
to
the
go
rod,
there.
entering within it voluntarily. The sensation was like being covered in meticulous, cruel swarms of insects. Each one going to work on him, devouring and reducing his connection to the Force, separating him. He had only seconds.
What are you doing?
Kaon barked. Be quiet! Anakin snapped, eyes closed, face lined with concentration and dripping with sweat. The metal hand creaked, tightening and tightening, overloading as a stream of metaphysical power moved down through it and into the rod. Power built within it, but it was not the strength of the Force which made the difference, but the mindset of the user. Memories of crafting circuits, of insulating parts, of learning what had never been taught, filled Anakin's mind. C-3PO had been the first great result of his natural technical ability, conjoined with his status within the Force. Now, in this moment, in this dark place, came the second. The rod seemed to thunk, but not physically. Kaon felt it more than he heard it, and then heard Anakin gasp loudly, feeling the weight on his shoulder lessen as the Jedi managed to release him at last and fall away. But Kaon's attention was immediately shifted away as a new sensation permeated his shoulder and sank into him. His empty, stitched eyes widened and strained as he felt power flowing and circulating within him. It had been so long, but it was not the same. It took...
Shadowband, you're such an asshole for what you just did to this scene. Because now it went dirty. It went from he's got some Necron stuff embedded into him to Anakin is jerking on this guy's rod to make him stronger again. You dirty motherfucker.
Took Kaon a few moments to actually understand what the Jedi had managed to do. Sorry about that. I didn't realize, Anakin began to say, sitting on the ground, coated in cold sweat and looking paler than was healthy.
You reversed its polarity. You changed the blackstone from a suppressive force like those of the pylons on dead Cadia to an amplifying force like those found on blackstone fortresses.
The Space Marine muttered to himself. Kaon? Anakin asked, eyes narrowing. The Chaos Space Marine straightened and turned to regard him, almost as though his sight had returned.
Can you do that again?
He asked. Anakin's brow furrowed. Can I do what again? What happened? He asked.
You changed the rod. You made it an amplifier in place of a suppressor. Such things have been known to happen, but not from a psychic influence. Only technical skill can cause such things to happen. Right now, I feel my lost power, but I have 11 more rods impaled within my body. If you can do that again,
Kaon said. Anakin grimaced, but then stood up and cracked his neck. So, if I help you reverse the rest of them, you will be able to help me take out the other blank rooms, right? He asked.
No, Anakin Skywalker. If you can reverse all 11 of these rods, then we will not need to. With their power alone, I will be able to force open a space for us. And then, all we will need are my weapons.
He's gonna make him Super
Said the
Saiyan!
sorcerer. Anakin smiled wryly at that, and flexed his mechanical hand. All right, then what are we waiting for?
God, you're an idiot!
Castles by the Sea is a puzzly sand.
Why? Why is he so stupid? Oh God, this is chaos. No, just no. Okay, here we go. Nerva and the Faithful Flame.
The tech priest was guessing, literally
Yes,
flying
he's gonna
by the
rip
seat of
open
her
the fucking
pants at this
Immaterium on
point.
that ship.
She had studied everything, from the ritual of becoming, the theories and logics behind the mind-machine interface of the ancient thrones, and even memorized most of the facts having to do with the understood components of the awe-inspiring war machine which surrounded her.
Okay, hold on a second. I'm going to stop it right here because I'm going to explain something to you. I don't care who I'm fighting. I don't really care who the war is against, anything like that. If I find somebody that these people held in such fear that they did this much shit to keep them under wraps, I'm not going to automatically trust them. Because what the fuck is scaring these people who scare the shit out of me? What is scaring them so bad about him? It always gets worse.
But what she was attempting now was nearly heresy. Yet, for the sake of the machine cult, Nerva was willing to risk it. After all, the ritual of becoming was, by her reasoning, not sacred in and of itself, but rather it enabled the sacred work of her machine. So, attempting to speed it up, or skip it entirely, wouldn't break with true dogma, would it?
Prophet, depending
She
on
pushed
using
such
or not
encroaching
using, it still
thoughts
doesn't
out
matter.
of
He's
her
making him
focus,
extremely
closing her
powerful.
eyes in the same moment. Sin or not, she was committed to her course of action. She needed this night up and moving, and she needed it to happen in a matter of minutes, not hours. She could feel the weight of the guardsman sitting on top of her, could feel him shifting around as he failed to make the seating more comfortable, despite trying to. Behind her head, dendrite couplings and mind interface units extended out from the command throne, moving through her dark hair and finding the input ports which ringed the back of her skull. One by one, they hissed and connected, each mechanical serpent seizing a socket with circular jaws and sealing tight around it. There was a cold sensation then, as she was linked into the data exchange system of the night. Not unlike the sensations she received when coupling to a local noosphere. With her connection now secure and confirmed nominal, she waited for just a moment, listening for feedback, for the soul which dwelt within the machine. But, as she expected, it was unresponsive, almost silent. Farness shifted in the darkness, and the battle raged outside, but beyond those muffled sounds, there was something else, whispering. Nerva resisted the urge to fidget. She knew what came next normally. Hours and hours of waiting, as the psychic impressions and neural echoes of countless former nights burrowed their way into her skull and became a part of her. Perhaps an even larger part of her than who she was now. But there was no time at all. Swallowing and squeezing her closed eyes until light shone in her blindness, she did something that her master had warned her never to do. She did not wait idly, meditatively, as the machine's spirit began to feed her the knowledge and imprints she would need to become its master. Instead, she reached backwards towards the mechanical mind of the faithful flame with her own, serpent-like in the suddenness of her assault. She acted as she would while performing a mind intrusion on a hostile enemy, and by that hostility, Nerva found herself swallowed up into the mind of the machine, like a shadow cat leaping headlong into a ravine. The darkness she found waiting for her there was blacker and deeper than any the human eye could process, becoming a blindness which devoured the very concept of sight and color. The sensation was so strong, too strong. Nerva tried to withdraw, seeking something, anything as a reference point, but like someone who'd fallen into a pit, she could but scrabble at the sides of infinity, not halt or even stall her descent. She tried to close her eyes, to shield herself from the darkness gnawing away at her identity through them, but found she had no eyelids to close, or perhaps no eyes to shield. She felt her mind stretching like taffy, pulled farther and farther apart, leaving her shivering, tingling as though she was hovering over the precipice of a final experience. Her last thought was,
"Is this death?"
And even that thought was a barely coherent sliver in the screaming ocean of her rapidly darkening mind. And then, like a rubber band being released just before the point of snapping, she was back. Hard breaths pushed in and out of her, filling her lungs in grateful heaves. Wonderful sensations spread back throughout her body, reminding her of what living was, and for many moments she could not but appreciate the sudden vividness of her life and continued existence. Such was her elation at life that it took the young tech priest and aspirant many seconds to even realize her sudden mutilation. She gasped a panic-ridden breath, rolling up from the flat floor she found herself on as she suddenly noticed her missing pieces, wringing her now incomplete hands together. Her eyes bulged at the sight before her as what was left of her digits ran over the places where she had been disassembled, verifying through touch what her eyes had already told her. Smooth, unbroken skin, 5 whole, flesh-composed fingers, and a nail topping each one. Nerva patted her body, finding that she was dressed in only thin, richly red robes. She touched her abdomen, her legs, her face. Gone. Her augmentations were gone. All of them. She tried again and again to access her extra-human additions and found herself without the sense of them or sign of their existence. Her eyes scanned her surroundings, looking first at the floor near her as though she might find her missing parts laid out beside her. But there was nothing. A black, glossy floor of obsidian-like composition stretched out endlessly around her, and an equally black void yawned wide across each horizon, leaving her in darkness. She tried to cycle her vision into the infrared and then ultraviolet spectrums, but found her eyes unresponsive. Instinctively, her thoughts twitched and moved to run a full systems diagnostic, but again, nothing was there to receive the command.
She's been pulled down to the machine.
Suddenly, a weak flashing caught her, the soft pulsing of a line of runes visible in her vision. Faded, almost imperceptible, the line read, "Intrusion Alert," in soft, fuzzy red lettering. Comprehension filled Nerva like molten steel filling a mold. She was, even then, still interfacing with the night. This whole space was a mindscape she had been pulled into. The tech priest stood cautiously and marveled at the incredible finesse of it. She had almost no sense of her true body at all, and even her most intimate mind augmentations were being blocked and numbed out of her perception with limited exception. Her fingers felt just like fingers, and the detail in each sensation of it was crisp and completely real.
Yeah, she's been pulled down to the machine.
Perhaps too real, in fact. She could not recall having such a fine sense of touch, nor such clear vision. Nerva breathed in again, appreciating the rush of false air into her digital body. The temperature was comfortable. The gravity was a perfect match for Terran standard, at least so far as she could tell. But much as she was impressed by this mindscape, she was also short on time. Straightening, she looked about again, searching for any sign of the plain void, seeking the center of the machine's mind, seeking access. She almost fell backwards as she turned around and found that something had come upon her, silent in spite of its size and nature. She cried out in a way which was somewhat less than dignified, but recovered quickly, taking just a few steps back from the towering form before her. An enormous silver throne had stealthily materialized behind her, its backrest rising up into lance-like spires of metal. The throne would have been smooth, but for a haphazard pattern of deep, rectangular cuts of varying sizes and dimensions, which coated the entirety of the throne itself, giving it the appearance of an incomplete puzzle. Yet, more interesting than the odd nature and design of the seat was the being which was seated upon it. Looking small, almost toy-like amongst the enormity of the throne, was a silver-skinned child dressed in a white robe. The robe was pristine, embroidered with electrum runes Nerva could not read, and woven around its wearer, being composed of a single, wide and long sheet of cloth. The one who wore it was small and seemingly crippled, missing their right arm and left leg, as well as a part of their head and face, and several fingers and toes as well. The amputations, if that was indeed what she was meant to interpret them as, were odd in the extreme. Each one was covered in smooth, unbroken silver skin, implying no wounds were ever dealt or blades ever actually applied. And yet, the perfect lines and edges of each missing, rectangular portion of the being's body denoted a very clear, artificial removal. In fact, the more she considered it, the more it seemed that the being itself was artificial in nature and not just in truth, as everything here would be quote-unquote artificial, even her own current body. Bald, smooth, and androgynous, the creature was a beautiful rendition of the human form, save for the asymmetry created by its odd missing pieces. As if very intentionally signaling itself out as a machine spirit. She drew in a sharp breath, her emotions finally catching up with the directness of what she was attempting. Then she froze, clamping a tight control over her every errant thought and physical impulse. The tech priest watched the spirit, and it stared at her in return, unblinking and expressionless. Her human form reflected within a single blue eye. The other was missing, along with a large rectangular portion of its head and face.
I am Nerva Sharp 370Z,
she said, standing tall and rigid, face perfectly placid. The being tilted its head slowly, its lips trembling as though it may speak or cry, before its neck gradually twisted back to its original posture, all words unspoken. She did not blink, and so the sudden change of scenery was even more jarring. In one moment they had been within a void of glossy black, and now they were somewhere else, bright, white, sterile. Her composure nearly broke, but true to her discipline, she remained still. Only slowly moving her head from side to side, absorbing her new surroundings with eyes that trembled from the effort it took her not to react. She was within a laboratory of some kind, a sleek, pale space filled with smooth desks and elegant, almost Xenos machines. Banks of what Nerva took to be impressively sized cogitators hummed in small fields around her, each machine submerged in tranquil pools of sky blue coolant. Above her was a high domed ceiling composed of viewing windows, and all around her worked men and women dressed in white and pale blue gowns. They seemed not to notice her as she stood there, and looking back towards where the Silver Child had been, she found now only an empty throne being fussed and worked on frantically. The entire lab quaked then, metal squealing and glass tinking and shattering. The tremor was more than a little alarming, but from the way in which the men and women around her continued to toil without pause, she guessed it was not the first one, and that its origin was no mystery to these people. In fact, from the way they seemed to hasten their delicate work when the next tremor came, she suspected that their current task and source of whatever force was assailing them were intimately interlinked. A man stepped through her then, revealing her wraith-like nature in this space for the first time, his body breaking through hers like a bank of mist, though she felt nothing. From his unbroken stride, she surmised he did neither, and observed with interest as he approached the throne, and one of the women working on it nearby, a tall scientist, her face obscured with a surgical mask and heavy, augment-linked eyewear. In contrast to her, the approaching man wore a black synthetic jumpsuit, complete with port plugs for neural mind-machine interface and a shiny enclosed helmet. Like everything else, his clothing was sleek, yet it bore the defined, sharp lines of something distinctly unscientific. The same message was echoed in the candor of his every step. This man was no researcher, technician, or scientist. He was a warrior. The woman who was approaching him seemed to sense him in the last few feet and turned to face him, looking up from a technical datapad she held tightly in her hands. "It's not ready," she said to him, but the man was already shaking his head. "It has to be. We're out of time. Plug me in," he ordered. "Stop. You're not hearing me," the doctor insisted. "It is not ready. Your brain will fry like an egg, and we have no idea if you'll ever get conscious control of the Sentinel. We need to run tests, calibrate the—" "It is inside this city," he said. Though her face was hidden, the woman's posture spoke volumes. "What? How? When?" she started. "Listen, it didn't get inside this city just now. It's been inside this city for almost 10 minutes.
Okay.
We are out of time," said the man in the black jumpsuit. "Why didn't you... Fine. She relented, tapping away furiously on the datapad and stepping aside to allow him passage to the throne. The other technicians and scientists continued their feverish tinkering and adjusting all the while, even as the man sat down. Even as the mind link unit connected to the back of his head. "But what are we going to do if we lose you?" the woman asked him, not looking at the man as she spoke, instead working on her pad. The stark, white lighting of the room suddenly shifted in time with the sound of a loud klaxon, becoming a bright red. The change and sound of the alarm was followed shortly by the loud broadcast of alien words, the same the two had been using to speak. Nerva becoming cognizant of the fact that they were not Gothic of any kind, yet she had no difficulty understanding them. "Integration attempt in progress. All personnel, please evacuate the chamber. Integration attempt commencing," blared the loud yet calm voice over the hidden howlers mounted within the walls. Though most of the people in the room seemed to heed the warning in a hasty rush to escape, the scientist and warrior did not. She waited for his answer, and he gave it with little hesitation, speaking over the automated words. "Move on to the next warrior, and the next plan, again and again, and do not mourn me until we are finished. Do not mourn me until we have won," he said to her, voice grim as he gripped the armrest of the throne tightly.
That's what I'm thinking, Nick.
Mechanical fissures ripped open across the room, swallowing desks and chairs, machines and tools. It opened perfectly around the throne, and a moment later, Nerva could see why. Most of the floor withdrew to reveal a massive pool of the sky blue coolant. and the gargantuan form of a humanoid war machine dwelling within. It ascended on mechanical servos, rising to meet the throne, even as the throne slowly began to sink towards it. All the while, the scientists stood and watched the pilot, standing on a sliver of the floor, a pre-designated space to serve as a thin but dangerous walkway across the lake of thick, pale blue. The superheated metal hissed as it made contact with the air, stirring wind and steam into existence, blowing the woman's lab coat out around her in wild drafts of wickedly whipping air. She stood like a pillar, watching the man descend into the mouth of the machine and be sealed within. And then, pain! Nerva maintained her composure as best she could, teeth gritting, eyes closing tight as her hands balled into fists, nails sinking into her palms. Still, she remained upright. She stood, and she did not scream. But the pain! The pain! It was devouring everything, and it was growing worse and worse.
Why are you showing me this?
She managed to squeeze past the cage of her constricting teeth. She felt a hand fall onto her shoulder, and the pain ceased all at once, leaving her blinking, lightheaded enough to stumble, but kept steady by the
I think
hand.
she's seeing the birth of the machine.
She looked
itself.
to her right to see who it was, and was shocked to find the pilot standing there.
That's what I thought.
Her own face reflected back at her off the glossy surface of his helmet. They had returned to the Black Void, though the Silver Child was nowhere to be seen. He took his hand away from her and pressed a release on the back of his neck. The helm hissed and clicked, and he pulled it away, revealing a handsome, middle-aged face, framed in a beard, mustache, and hair of bright orange, holding a pale face and gray eyes. "You are being shown this, aspirant, as a mercy," he said to her. She turned to fully face him and stepped away.
A mercy? That pain was mercy? And what am I supposed to take away from that kind of mercy?
Nerva asked, breathing heavily as she attempted to rein back her control. "Your life, Nerva Sharp 370Z. I am the memory of Amunak Pental, the first pilot of this night, and I died attempting the mistake you're about to embark upon. There is no way to rush the integration. A human will is simply not powerful enough to withstand it. Go back. Return to your true flesh. Escape this fate while you can, for it leads not to salvation, but to painful death. Go back," he said to her. Nerva shuddered, considering him for only a few moments before firming her jaw and spreading her stance somewhat.
I cannot.
She said. The words gave her further strength, and she fixed defiant eyes upon the failed ghost of the first night.
I will not.
There we go. Hey, String Storm. Okay. Let's see. Arca must have ducked out. I was wondering why he wasn't talking for a little bit. Okay, so that was episode 26. The machine spirit wouldn't be the one. Now, when a operator, when a princeps dies or gets swallowed by the machine spirit, and the knights, of course, will it's not really their soul, but it's more an echo of that person remains in the machine. and it becomes more or less part of the machine spirit, but kind of disjointed from it at the same time. Yeah, so that's what she saw, the first operator, and that had to be during the Dark Age of technology, probably during the fall of humanity, during the Dark Age of technology. Whatever it was that had breached the walls might have something to do with it. Make a U-turn. Shadowband, you are you're fired. You're just fired. Yeah, Force Ghost, the machine spirit form. Oh, what's this? Okay. Let's see. Prophet, we know you bow to the Chaos Gods. What? Hey, come on, man. Really? We know this. Alright, so let me see if there's anything I missed. I don't think I missed anything. Yeah, sleep, that would be the case. The war against the men of Iron Prophet, I would say it was either that or something very similar to that, or a localized threat, because the pilot didn't say that it was like one. It basically said one thing. It was a singular entity that had entered the town, and it had to have been something substantial. Now, if it was the Men of Iron, I would be assuming there'd be, he'd be talking about multiple, like a breach or something like that would have happened. But he was talking about a singular entity. I really like this episode. I want to see what happens between Mace and the librarian. I love to call Anakin an idiot, but at the same time, damn. Just damn. The sheer fact of the matter is that he does not have the knowledge to compare what he's actually screwing with. Unless the AI is a hive mind. Yeah. A big nid? No. This, from the description that we got, and the language that was used, it was probably done during the Dark Age of technology. Any key did nothing wrong. The fuck? Alright. In any case, that was episode 26. I enjoyed doing it like this. I really enjoyed doing this as a live stream. Did you guys enjoy this? And I'll wait a couple of seconds for that message to actually get to the chat, because I look to be on like a 15 to 20 second delay here. Because if blame Anakin or replace blame Borgar, I still can't say blame. Well, it's going to be blame Anakin in this universe, because, or what was that trooper's name? What was that trooper's name? Knowledge, power, steal it well. That's a Blood Raven. That's the Blood Raven's secret phrase. So what I'm going to do is, if I have a chance to, I'm going to do more stuff like this, where I'm actually live streaming this kind of stuff. I enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun. I will probably set times to do it. Nick, I'm watching Skywalker like a hawk. I got a feeling he's going to turn into a Chaos Lord relatively quickly. I really, really do. In any case, yeah, that's it for this episode. Next episode, I think there's 6 more before I catch up to the current space where he's at in this story. So it's Wednesday night now. We're going to be considering doing this probably in a few more days. Yeah, that's it. I don't think I need to say it, but if you guys haven't subscribed to me yet and you'd like to, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And jump in Discord from time to time just to say hey. I'll catch you guys next time. Commander Skywalker, I suddenly... What? Yes, the Hospitallers here. Shadow, stop talking! You're worse than Strider in some regards. Why?